The movie begins with the appearance of Jimmy, who is a prisoner. He stares at pictures of himself and his brother on the wall of his prison cell. Then, shortly after, a prison guard comes to him. The guard takes Jimmy out of his cell, because that would be Jimmy's date with freedom after so many years in prison. Before releasing Jimmy, they ask him to appear before the warden. The warden advised Jimmy to start a new life, to be a good citizen, and to abide by the laws of the country. But it seems that Jimmy was not interested in what the warden said, because he couldn't wait to get out. Meanwhile, we see a corrupt police officer. This officer was dealing with a drug dealer because he was an addict. Jimmy gets his car back after his release from prison. He also obtains a gun and information on a man who was his target. Then he drives his car and heads toward his destination, California. And with steady steps accompanied by a desire for revenge, Jimmy walked into a building and killed the man whose information was on file. After Jimmy kills the first target, he goes to meet a guy named Roy. Roy is the person who gave Jimmy the car and the gun. Roy was a trusted informant. Jimmy asks Roy to give him information for other people, because Jimmy prepared a revenge plan during his time in prison. And because Roy is a person who does not like to be threatened by anyone, he contacts his bodyguard. But Roy's bodyguard discovered that Jimmy is the person nicknamed the Ghost and is also the most terrifying criminal, so the bodyguard decided to withdraw. In the absence of any other option for Roy and for fear of being killed, Roy gives Jimmy all the information he wants about the people. While Jimmy goes looking for targets, the corrupt police officer and the cops investigate the first murder. Then we see a man dubbed the killer receive a phone call. And this man works as a professional killer. The call was the job of someone asking the killer to kill Jimmy. During the investigation of the first murder, the corrupt officer cooperates with the detective, Cicero. And Cicero was able to obtain information about Jimmy and revealed that Jimmy was involved in a major robbery and discovered that he was nicknamed the driver because of his high driving skill. We go back in time to the day of the robbery. When Jimmy and his gang managed to steal, they were ambushed by another group of thieves who killed members of Jimmy's gang, including Jimmy's brother, who was brutally killed before Jimmy's eyes. Then Jimmy was shot in the head and the thieves thought he was dead. But Jimmy was saved by a team of doctors and put an iron plate in his head. Then they put Jimmy in jail. Detective Cicero concluded that Jimmy might want revenge after his release from prison. Meanwhile, Jimmy is able to locate his second target, Kenneth Tyson. He was a middle-aged man, and he was the one who filmed the robbers who attacked Jimmy and his gang. We watch the killer hunt down Jimmy. After Jimmy finds his target and kills him, Jimmy leaves the scene immediately. But the killer intercepts Jimmy, and gunfire is exchanged between them. Jimmy manages to escape unharmed. The killer realized that Jimmy was only killing his targets and not harming anyone else. After that, Jimmy visits his ex-girlfriend, who finds out that Jimmy is killing those involved in killing his brother. Jimmy's girlfriend started to get annoyed that Jimmy had abandoned her, but Jimmy told her he had to do it to protect her and their unborn child. But she had tears in her eyes and told Jimmy that she had miscarried the child and decided to start a new life with another man and achieve her happiness away from Jimmy. She wished Jimmy all the best and Jimmy walked away to continue his mission of revenge. At a Nevada strip club, Jimmy finds his next target, a man named Nixon, where Jimmy got into a fight with this guy. Jimmy managed to stab this man and left the scene immediately. The next day, during the radio news bulletin, Jimmy learned that Nixon had not died and that he was in a critical condition in the hospital. Jimmy decided to return to complete his mission. Meanwhile, the corrupt officer learns that Jimmy was the one who stabbed Nixon at a strip club. So this officer went to the hospital because he thought Jimmy would be there to kill Nixon and complete his mission. And we see the person who sent the killer to kill Jimmy sends the location of Jimmy, who was heading to the hospital to kill Nixon. After Jimmy arrived at the hospital, Jimmy went straight to the operating room and without any mercy he killed Nixon on the spot. When the corrupt officer heard the gunfire, he ran to see what happened, but saw Jimmy running away. He chased after Jimmy and they exchanged fire. But Jimmy manages to disappear and escape. After Jimmy runs away, he realizes that someone is after him. Because of Jimmy's driving experience, Jimmy was able to put the killer in front of him and he directed the gun at the killer and was able to kill him, but Jimmy only shot the car tire. But the killer had to carry out his mission, so he shot Jimmy, but the bullet hit Jimmy's neck. After a chase between Jimmy and the killer, Jimmy goes to his parents' house. Jimmy intended to kill his father because Jimmy believed that his father had arranged the murder of Jimmy and his brother. And Jimmy thought so because they refused to share the money after the bank robbery. At home, Jimmy's mom was tending to Jimmy's wounds and was trying to convince him that his dad didn't do it. Then Jimmy thought his brother's girlfriend set them up. Then Jimmy goes to continue the revenge process and kills the last target, and this man is called Alexander Jared. This man was a traveling missionary. During Jimmy's revenge mission, Jimmy listens to a radio broadcast of Jared's spiritual lecture on actions such as robbery, murder, and revenge. Meanwhile, we watch the cops praise the corrupt officer for his courage in confronting Jimmy. This officer told Detective Cicero that the people Jimmy had killed were involved in a robbery. Then the officer went to stop Jimmy from killing Jared. Not only did the officer go to Jared's whereabouts, but the killer also got information and went there. Then Jimmy went to the place where Jared was. Jared knew what had happened to his friends and was lecturing on revenge and hate. Jared took Jimmy away from the people. Jared told Jimmy that he had repented of what he had done and had begun a new life. He wept and begged Jimmy to forgive him. Jimmy pointed the gun at Jared, but Jimmy, after hearing Jared's apology, decided not to kill him. Then Jimmy went back to the place where Jared had advised people. He sat alone and began to think about all his actions and sins. Then the killer arrives at the place and points a gun at Jimmy, who was looking at a picture of the people he killed. The killer tells Jimmy that he will complete his mission and kill him. But before that, the killer tells Jimmy that someone else in the gang is responsible for killing Jimmy's brother. And the killer tells Jimmy that this person is someone Jimmy knows. And the killer tells Jimmy that this person knew that Jimmy would return for revenge. Because of this person hired the killer on a mission to kill Jimmy before he reached him. Detective Cicero learns that someone else was involved in the murder of Jimmy's brother. She managed to reveal his true identity. Meanwhile, while the killer was pointing his gun at Jimmy, the police officer entered the scene and pointed the gun at Jimmy. Then the officer shoots Jimmy, and we know that this corrupt officer is the one who shot Jimmy in the robbery. He was the mastermind behind the murder of Jimmy's brother and his gang. We learn that it was Jimmy's brother's girlfriend who told the corrupt officer everything about the robbery. Then the corrupt officer went out with the killer and offered the money to the killer. But the killer refused the money and told the officer not to contact him again. The corrupt officer thought it was all over and called his wife, who turned out to be Jimmy's brother's girlfriend. But we watched Jimmy shoot the corrupt officer, where we found out that the bullet hit the metal plate placed by doctors in Jimmy's skull. Then Detective Cicero arrives at the scene after Jimmy's departure. Cicero is withholding information that points to the involvement of the corrupt officer. We watch Jimmy throw his brother's ashes into the sea. We watch Jared lecturing on forgiveness, hate, and revenge. And here the movie ends.